Hello everyone, thanks for dropping by. You all know who that is, and the inevitable question, if I was super wealthy and she was single, would I go with her? Nope. She's 2 and a bit inches taller than me, except when she's wearing heels, then she's a bit taller still. But as it is today, she's happily married for over 25 years and she's got 2 grown-up children. But Carrie there is a lot more friendly looking than Nada, Numi and Rebecca, because you can see in her eyes, you can always tell if somebody's genuine by looking at their eyes, whether they're smiling or not. You could say that is the Trinity effect. So, attractive as she is, she's totally off limits. Anyway, enough about Carrie. Now, you know that American politics has been in a bit of an upturn of late recently, with President Trump saying he's signing an executive order that the 50-50 split of divorces is going to be legal, and the inevitable question in the feminist camps is Trump is going to do away with no-fault divorce. So I've been having a look around over the weekend, and first of all I found this. This is the National Center of Health Statistics in America. As you can see, it says the number of marriages in America is 2,041,926. The marriage rate 6.1% per thousand population, but the number of divorces is 672,502 last year. Divorce rate is 2.4% per thousand population, so it's closing in on the number of marriages. If you click on that, it brings up a PDF file, number of marriages and marriage rates in America from 2000-2023. As you can see, in 2000 it was 2,315,000 marriages, and in 2023 it was 2,041,926 marriages. Now if you drop down, it gives you the same but divorces. In 2000, 944,000 divorces, but 2,627,502 divorces. Now, you could say that divorce rate's going down, but as you know, as more and more American men have decided not to get married in the first place, so as there's less men getting married, there's less divorces happening. Now, as you know, Trump says he's gonna reverse the divorce statistics, so 50-50 isn't on the cards. That's upset a lot of the feminist women. Whoops, because I found this. This is for Nation, don't know what that is. Threats to no default divorce and its implications for violence against women. This was done on January 12th last year. Said Republicans are renewing their efforts to attack civil rights and American liberties and now are eyeing no-fault divorce. Trump has not said that at all. This is a hit piece on American establishment and a lot of American talk about American politics, etc. So that's just wanted to show you a backlash against Trump that is supposedly coming. But looking around, I found this Medium. This was done on February the 13th this year. Making marriage great again. Trump is changing the divorce laws and there's an indirect benefit for women, which contradicts this article. He says, Trump made an executive order. Trump made a change to the divorce law so that 50% split of property is no longer the standard in a divorce. In California, 50-50 is a standard for divorce. And as he said, just because you get married to a rich man doesn't mean you get half of his wealth and end up rich after divorce. And then you got to pay to get the full story. But this is the bit that took my eye. The number of people who are married have dropped to 50%, down from 72 in 1960, when America was quite good, with the rate continuing to slowly decline each year. Now you go back to that's what they're referring to. The rate's slowing down, but is the number of men getting married going up? The answer is no. So this is a British site. Now this has probably got an alternative version over in America. The financial reality facing women on divorce. Recent evidence has demonstrated the financial precarity facing women, particularly mothers, at the time of divorce. This was done on the 12th of March 2025 by a group called the Women's Budget Group, written naturally by two women. It says, contrary to the narrative that men do particularly badly on divorce, recent research evidence has demonstrated the financial precarity facing women, particularly mothers and female domestic abuse survivors at the point of divorce. I don't agree with domestic abuse at all, but men can also be abused in a marriage. It's up to the women to choose a partner who will become their husband, because women have to say yes or no when a man proposes. And then it goes on about in Britain, pension wealth is particularly important on divorce, but the study showed it is regularly overlooked. Whilst the law allows one spouse rights to their pension to be allocated to the other on divorce. I've seen cases of that here in Britain. And women have accumulated a pension provision. Although women are as likely as men to have a pension, men are likely to have paid into it for longer. This is about, here in Britain, we pay national insurance stamps throughout our working life. You've got to pay for 30 years for a full state pension. I paid it for 43 years for my full state pension. Now women don't get it longer because the women have to have time off when you're having children. But they think they can't really understand that they have to have 30 years for a full state pension. So even if she has children and she goes back working full time to pay full stamps, not part time, that doesn't count. Then naturally she won't have a pension as much as a husband who has to stay at work to provide for the family. And then it says, secondly, only a third of divorcees with a pension not yet in payment did not know the value of their own, let alone their spouse's pension pot. That's because you don't find out how much your pension pot is, if it's a company pension, until you're getting close to retirement age, with women more likely than men to say that they did not know. Well, it's up to the woman to find out if she's thinking of getting a divorce. In addition, nearly a quarter of those where an employer pension did not know what kind of pension scheme they are enrolled in, whether a defined benefit or defined contribution. That is you got to pay N amount into the pension pot. When I did my final job at Amazon, I poured as much as I could afford into my pension pot so I can get a small little pension when I left Amazon after 5 and a bit years. And it says this lack of awareness and understanding of pensions fed through into how, if at all, pensions are taken into account when couples sought to make their financial arrangements. Only 11% of couples yet to retire have made a pension sharing arrangement. And then it goes on about it. But it's a article that women, if they're going to thinking of divorcing their husband, they have to face financial reality, and this gives them an idea of what they're going to jump into, because the grass isn't always greener on the other side of the fence. Now, going back to America, the future and no-fault divorce laws that False has been falsely accused of implementing, when it says he's made a change in divorce law so that 50-50 split in property is no longer the standard in a divorce. It says, as of early 2025, no-fault divorce remains legal in all 50 states of America. However, lawmakers in several states, including Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas, have introduced or are actively discussing negative proposals that could restrict or eliminate the practice. And it says, these efforts are driven by concerns over the impact of no-fault divorce on family stability, with proponents arguing a return to stricter divorce requirements, while opponents warn of potential negative consequences for individuals in difficult or unsafe marriages. Now that is the feminist line, going against women, but they forget that 80% of divorces in America are implemented by women. And then it goes down about what Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas are proposing, and divorce laws before no-fault practices, requirements to prove fault. Courts require one spouse to prove adultery, in other words, one of them being unfaithful, abuse. It depends on who the woman picks as a husband. If she picks a bad boy, then she probably will get abused. Abandonment. There's been cases on the comments in the MGTOW channels that the woman has walked off, leaving the wife, the husband, and the children. Substance abuse, that's another thing. The drugs or alcohol before granting a divorce. If neither party could establish a fault, that the court could deny the divorce. And then this is the no-fault divorce, simplified process, irreconcilable differences. That's the get-out clause that I've seen in Hollywood marriages and all across America. And then we got the arguments for no-fault divorce. Could the federal government influence divorce laws? And withholding funds, national divorce legislation. Congress could establish federal divorce regulations. This would likely face constitutional challenges, and of course the feminist crowd will be bouncing up and down. And Supreme Court rulings. The Supreme Court challenging no-fault divorce could reach the Supreme Court, potentially reshaping how states handle divorces. And then looking ahead, as early as 2025, no state has officially repealed no-fault divorce, so discussions continue to highlight legislations, while these proposals have yet to become the law. The ongoing debates against no-fault divorce should be a policy issued in the coming years, but the women's groups and the left think that Trump has signed it into law when it hasn't. He just changed the divorce law, but yet a woman won't get 50% of what the guy's got if he was a rich man, as he said. Just because you get married to a rich man doesn't mean you get half of his wealth and end up rich after divorce, which is a career option for a lot of American women. Now, on America, there's a lot of grey divorces on the rise in relationships. Experts think this is why. This is a piece with more or less what's been covered before. The grey out divorces, 50-50 alcohol age after 50 years of age, are more than doubled in recent years. In 1990, 8.7 divorces happened among adults 15 and over, but by 2019 the number had grown to 36%. And then it goes on to baby boomers. During this time, legal separating your spouse become a more socially acceptable way out of an unhappy marriage. Why was the marriage unhappy? Does the woman just get bored? The marriage is boring. Marriages are boring for some people. It's up to the couple to make it work. And some boomers who married young, got divorced in the 70s, were getting divorced again. In other words, divorcees getting married and getting divorced again. Maybe, just maybe, she took half of his stuff. 50-50 split. And it says this is especially true for people over 50 who may be living longer but in worse health and sometimes involving chronic conditions. Well, that's where till death, in sickness and in health, the death do us part. For a study of the journals of wherever that is. And it says, women in particular awaken to the reality of marriage, especially in later life, involves a great deal of caretaking. Yes, it does. If you're already unhappy and the quality of your marriage, continuing to deal with your spouse in sickness and health is not as enticing. Well, why did you get married in the first place then? And then more yada yada yada. And this is if you're going to do it, if you're a great divorcee, advice what to do. Now, the last thing is I found this on New York Post. Whoops. A menopause divorce is on the rise. Middle-aged women leave marriages at record rates as menopause unleashes built-up resentment. So the menopause American women are finding there's a convenient excuse to end their marriage, and if the guy is wealthy that they've been married to, they get 50% of the property and goodies and prizes, especially in the more blue states in America. It says the change is causing big changes in marriages, while the decreasing number of marriages are ending in divorce overall in recent decades. The rates continue to climb among adults aged 50 and over, which you go back to that, the grey divorce rate. For some women, menopause can ultimately improve close relationships as they seek solace in friendships while collaborating with their male partners. Notice it doesn't say husband, to better understand what their body is going through. Others, however, believe that menopause gives them the clarity to leave their unsatisfying marriages. In other words, a convenient excuse. Couples separate toilets save their marriage. Don't want to listen to them. One recent divorced ex-bride, Melissa McCure, spoke in USA Today about her change of heart as she entered premenopausal, the period of time leading to the menopause. She experienced hot flushes and lack of sleep, and her husband's negative state of mind started to bother her. And she zipped down. This is her. Land whale, and there's a red flag. And how much makeup has she got on, and what filters have they used for this photograph? And then yada 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 yada. Men often blame divorce on irrationality, but the results of menopause with the negative of, my wife is crazy. But Alexei Cable-Frake, founder of Agenda, there's always some organisation said it's not the case. Women are gaining clarity menopausal, and that clarity tells them to leave if things aren't good. In other words, an excuse. And then we get to the comments. This first thread is interesting. It says actually as much financially as if anything else, by the age of menopause, people generally build enough assets and earn enough to be able financially to make the more choices about how they want to live. And then goes on. Who is in the right gets married these days, let alone these wildebeests saying I do doesn't mean saying I don't to salads. In other words, they get a pension pot, wealth, and she gets menopause, and she uses that as a convenient excuse to end the marriage and get cash and prizes. But these articles are all essentially a moot point, because increasing numbers of American men, as you know in the MGTOW videos on YouTube, are not wanting to even get into a relationship, let alone get married. So the number of divorces naturally will go down as the pool of married couples starts to shrink, because guys are not topping the pool up and they're going their own way, and women are finding it increasingly hard to even get a date, let alone get married. So this is an interesting take. I've found a few more things, but that would make the video too long, so I'll have to end it now. You know the routine, people. Like, dislike, etc. is completely up to you. I might continue this next week because I've got a few more things sort of on a tangent to what Trump has been saying. So for now, you know the routine. Like, dislike, comment, subscribe. It's completely up to you. So until next Monday, that's it from me. Bye bye.